Welcome back for another deep dive. This time, we're taking on a book that's really made waves, Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman.
Yeah, this one's a classic.
It is, and I'm excited about this one because it's not just about, reading theories. It's about experiencing them firsthand as we go through it.
Absolutely prepare to be surprised by like your own thought processes.
Yeah.
Kahneman uses these fascinating experiments and just real life examples that really make you go like, wait, I do that too. Why it really exposes the hidden machinery behind like all of our decisions.
Okay, so let's start with the foundation. Kahneman argues that our minds operate using two systems. System 1 and System 2. Can you give us the rundown of these mental players?
Sure. So think of system one as like your brain's autopilot.
Okay.
It's fast, intuitive, effortless. It's the system that helps you instantly recognize a familiar face
Right.
or solve like simple problems like 2 plus 2. But here's the catch. It's also the system that jumps to conclusions, often based on very limited information.
So it's like the quick draw gunslinger of our mind, but maybe not always the most accurate.
Exactly. Kahneman calls this what you see is all there is, or WI-SIAD.
WISAID, I love it.
Yeah, so system one relies heavily on these mental shortcuts called heuristics, which are great for speed, but can lead to biases like the halo effect or the availability heuristic.
Oh, those biases, you're telling me I'm not as rational as I think I am. Tell me more about these mental traps.
Well, the halo effect is when we judge someone based on a single positive trait, like their appearance or charisma, and then we just assume they must also be intelligent, kind, trustworthy just because of that one trait.
Interesting.
The availability heuristic, on the other hand, is when we overestimate the likelihood of events that easily come to mind.
Okay, that makes sense. If we constantly see, news stories about shark attacks, we might start believing that they're far more common than they actually are. Our brains just latch on to what's readily available.
Exactly, and Kahneman illustrates this beautifully with an anecdote about the letter K. He asked participants if K is more likely to appear as the first or third letter in a word.
Okay.
Most people confidently say it's more common as the first letter,
Yeah, I would say that too.
but guess what? It's actually more frequent in the third position.
Really?
We fall for this illusion because it's easier to recall words starting with K.
So even seemingly simple judgments can be skewed by these mental shortcuts. What's fascinating here is that we're completely unaware of these biases at play. We think we're being perfectly logical when in reality our system 1 is pulling the strings.
Precisely. Now let's contrast this with system two. This is the deliberate analytical part of our mind. It's slower, more effortful, and capable of overriding those impulsive system one judgments. But it also has a weakness. It's lazy.
Okay.
It prefers to conserve energy whenever possible.
So system 2 is like the pilot who's supposed to be in control but often dozes off, letting the autopilot system 1 take over?
That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
And because our minds prefer the path of least resistance, we often default to system one even when it leads us to errors.
That explains why we feel so mentally drained after making a series of complex decisions. Our system 2 has been working overtime. But if we're not careful, our lazy system 2 can let those impulsive system 1 decisions slip through. Is that what we see happening in the invisible gorilla experiment?
Absolutely. That experiment demonstrates how intense focus can make us blind to other seemingly obvious things.
Right.
Participants were so focused on counting basketball passes that they completely missed a person in a gorilla suit walking right through the middle of the game.
You wouldn't think you'd miss something like that. It really highlights how our attention is a limited resource. And even when we think we're paying close attention, we can still miss important details.
It's a powerful example of how our perception is shaped by what we choose to focus on.
Right.
And what's even more fascinating is that it's not just about visual attention. Our minds can be primed to notice certain things and ignore others based on all sorts of factors, even without us realizing it.
Priming, that sounds almost like subliminal messaging or something. How does that work exactly?
Think of priming as like a subtle nudge to your system one. One exposure to certain words, ideas, or even sensory experiences can unconsciously influence our subsequent thoughts and actions. It's like setting the stage for your mind to interpret information in a particular way.
So it's not that we're being controlled by these primes. It's more like they're subtly influencing the way we interpret the world around us. Give me an example. This all seems very abstract.
Absolutely. Here's a classic example from the book. Imagine you see the word eat flash briefly on a screen. Later, you're asked to complete the fragment SOP. You're much more likely to fill in the blank with SOUP rather than SOAP because the word eat primes your mind to think about food-related concepts.
Wow, I see what you mean. That's incredibly subtle, but also incredibly powerful. It makes you wonder how much of our thinking is shaped by these unconscious influences.
That's precisely the point Kahneman is driving at, and the implications are far-reaching, from marketing and advertising to politics and even our personal relationships.
Yeah, it's amazing to think about how easily our minds can be swayed by these unconscious cues. And it makes you wonder how much of what we perceive as free will is actually just our System 1 running the show.
That's a great question, and one that Kahneman really digs into. He talks about the difference between intuition and expertise, and how sometimes our gut feelings can be incredibly accurate, while other times they can lead us astray.
Right, and what's fascinating here is that Kahneman argues that true expertise is not just about having a gut feeling. It's about having this vast store of experience in a specific domain
Okay.
and receiving consistent feedback on your judgments. Think of the seasoned chess master who seems to intuitively know the right move. That intuition is actually based on years of practice and recognizing patterns from thousands of previous games.
So it's not just about having a hunch, it's about having a deep well of experience to draw from. Exactly. Here's the catch. Intuition can be misleading when applied to domains with poor feedback or unpredictable outcomes like long-term political forecasting or stock picking.
Right.
In these areas, even experts can fall prey to the illusion of validity, believing they have special insights when the evidence suggests otherwise.
That makes sense. We often see, financial pundits making bold predictions about the market, but their track records are often no better than chance. So how do we know when to trust our intuition and when to be more skeptical?
That's where System 2 comes in. We need to engage our deliberate analytical mind to evaluate the evidence, consider the base rates, and be aware of our own biases. Kahneman outlines a number of strategies for taming our intuitive predictions, and one of the most important is taking an outside view.
What does that mean exactly, to get out of our own heads?
It means looking beyond our own specific plans and considering the outcomes of similar projects or situations. For example, if you're planning a home renovation project. Don't just focus on your ideal timeline and budget.
Yeah.
Look at how long similar projects have actually taken and what unforeseen challenges others have encountered.
Right.
This will give you a much more realistic estimate.
That's so true. Every time I've tried to renovate something, it's taken way longer and cost way more than I initially anticipated. I have definitely fallen victim to the planning fallacy.
The planning fallacy is a classic example of how our inside view, our own narrow perspective, can lead us astray. We tend to be overly optimistic about our own abilities and underestimate the potential for things to go wrong.
So the key is to be more realistic about what could go wrong and factor those unknowns into our plans.
Precisely. And speaking of things that can go wrong, Kahneman also has a lot to say about risk and how we perceive it. It turns out our emotional responses to potential gains and losses are not symmetrical.
Okay.
We feel the pain of a loss much more intensely than the pleasure of an equivalent gain. This is what Kahneman calls loss aversion.
Okay, so that explains why it feels so much worse to lose $100 than it feels good to find $100.
Yes, exactly. Loss aversion has a powerful influence on our decisions, often leading us to make choices that are not in our best interests. For example, we might hold on to a losing investment for far too long, hoping to avoid the pain of realizing that loss,
Right.
even when it makes more sense financially to cut our losses and move on.
It's like we're more afraid of the negative outcome than we are motivated by the potential positive outcome.
That's a great way to put it, and this has huge implications for everything from how we approach negotiations to how we manage our personal finances.
Another concept that really struck me was framing effects. Kahneman shows how the way a choice is presented or framed can dramatically influence our decisions, even if the underlying options are the same.
It's remarkable how easily our decisions can be swayed by simply changing the way information is presented.
Yeah.
For instance, imagine you're told a medical procedure has a 10% mortality rate.
Yeah.
Now imagine you're told the same procedure has a 90% survival rate.
Okay.
The information is identical, but the emotional impact is completely different.
Wow, that's a perfect example. Even though the odds are the same, the way it's framed evokes a completely different emotional response.
Exactly. Our minds are wired to react more strongly to the negative framing, even if rationally it shouldn't matter.
Right.
And this susceptibility to framing effects is something that marketers and politicians are well aware of. They know how to nudge us in a particular direction by highlighting certain aspects of a choice and downplaying others.
It's pretty sobering to realize how easily our decisions can be manipulated by these subtle framing techniques. What can we do to counter this?
Awareness is key when faced with a decision. Ask yourself, is this information being presented in a way that's unduly influencing my judgment? Try to reframe the choice in different ways to see if your preference changes.
So it's about actively engaging our system two to deconstruct these framing effects and get to the heart of the matter.
Precisely another fascinating aspect of Kahneman's work is his exploration of the two selves, the experiencing self and the remembering self.
Okay.
The experiencing self lives in the present moment, while the remembering self constructs the narrative of our lives, pulling from our memories of past experiences.
That's an interesting distinction. So how do these two selves influence our decision making?
Well, the remembering self tends to focus on the peak and end of an experience, neglecting the duration.
Okay.
This means we might remember a vacation fondly because of a few amazing moments, even if most of it was pretty average.
It's like we're all amateur filmmakers editing our memories to highlight the most dramatic scenes.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. And this can lead to some strange choices. For example, we might opt for a longer, more painful medical procedure over a shorter one if the longer one ends with less discomfort, even though it means enduring more pain overall.
It's almost as if our remembering self hijacks our decision-making process, leading us to choices that don't actually maximize our overall well-being.
Exactly. We need to be mindful of this peak end rule and not let our memories unduly influence our future decisions.
This book really challenges our assumptions about what it means to be rational if we're so easily swayed by biases, emotions, and framing effects. Can we ever truly make objective judgments?
Yeah, it's almost like we have these two competing versions of ourselves, battling it out in our minds, the one who lives in the moment versus the one who curates all the memories. It makes you wonder, how does all of this affect our pursuit of happiness? We often assume that like more money, more success equals more happiness, but Kahneman seems to challenge that notion. You've hit on a key insight there. Kahneman differentiates between two types of happiness. Yeah. Experience well-being, which is the happiness we feel in the moment, and then life satisfaction, which is like our overall evaluation of our lives. And as it turns out, these two types of happiness don't always align.
That's interesting. So it's not just about feeling good in the moment, it's also about how we reflect on our lives as a whole. I can see how those two things could be at odds sometimes.
Precisely. He uses the example of winning the lottery.
Oh.
While it brings this like initial surge of joy, studies have shown that lottery winners don't actually experience a long-term increase in happiness. The euphoria fades, and people often end up no happier than they were before.
So even a life-changing event like winning the lottery doesn't guarantee lasting happiness. Why is that?
It all comes down to adaptation. We humans are incredibly adaptable creatures. We get used to changes in our circumstances, both good and bad. That new car or bigger house eventually becomes the new normal, and we stop getting the same boost of happiness from it.
It's like that saying, the grass is always greener on the other side. We're always striving for that next thing, thinking it will finally bring us lasting happiness, but then we adapt and the cycle starts all over again.
Exactly. So true happiness isn't about achieving some static state of bliss. It's about finding ways to continuously cultivate happiness in our daily lives. And that's where Kahneman's insights become really valuable. He emphasizes the importance of focusing on activities that bring us genuine joy and meaning rather than chasing these external markers of success.
So it's not about the size of our bank account or the number of accolades we accumulate. It's about the quality of our experiences and the connections we make.
Precisely. It's about being present in the moment, savoring the good times, and finding meaning in the face of challenges. And it's also about understanding that our memories of experiences are often more powerful than the experiences themselves. Remember the peak end rule.
Right. Our remembering self tends to prioritize the most intense moments and the ending of an experience. So a vacation with a few incredible highlights and a fantastic final day might be remembered more fondly than a longer, more consistently pleasant trip.
Exactly. It's almost as if we're writing the story of our own life, choosing the most memorable scenes to include in the narrative.
So if we want to create a more fulfilling life story, we need to be mindful of the experiences we're choosing and how we're shaping those memories.
I think that's a great takeaway, and I think it speaks to the broader message of thinking fast and slow. This book is a powerful reminder that our minds are amazing, but also incredibly fallible. By understanding our own cognitive biases and the quirks of our mental machinery, we can start to make more informed and deliberate choices, not just about our finances or our careers, but about how we live our lives.
This deep dive has really been a journey of self-discovery. It's made me question my assumptions about rationality, decision-making, and even happiness. What are some key takeaways you'd like our listener to remember from our exploration of thinking fast and slow?
First and foremost, remember that you have two systems at play. System one, the intuitive thinker, and system two, the deliberate one. Recognize the power of System 1, but don't let it run the show unchecked.
Yeah.
Engage System 2. Ask questions. Be skeptical, and don't be afraid to challenge your own assumptions.
It's like we're training our minds to be more aware of the mental shortcuts and biases that can lead us astray.
Exactly. And remember, understanding these biases is the first step toward overcoming them. We may not be perfectly rational creatures, but we can become more aware, more deliberate, and ultimately more in control of our own minds.
Well, there you have it, folks. Our deep dive into Daniel Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Slow has come to an end. We hope you've enjoyed the journey and learned a few things about yourselves along the way.
And as you go about your day, keep this question in mind. Knowing what you now know about the two systems of your mind, what steps can you take to make more thoughtful and rational decisions in your own life?
That's a great question to ponder. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring.